IVM.
You're listening to Storytellers and Story Sellers. This is Vineet Kanabar live on tape. We're still in conversation with Vivek, Lath about the business of entertainment around the world. In the first part, you heard us talk about the business of rights around the world, the different types of rights that get bought and sold. We also talked a little bit about the OTT and direct to OTT versus the theatrical debate that's been going on in India for a bit as well. Check it out by scrolling up, or the link in the description or somewhere there. Vivek, great to still have you here. Let me get you started on episode 2 of our chat with your thoughts on the podcasting scene. As someone who's constantly involved in buying and selling of content, you see, I'm sure you're exposed to a lot more genres and formats, etc. What's your take on the podcasting scene globally and in India?
So it's fairly new, Vineet, at this point. While podcasting has been happening since last 15 years, I listened to my first podcast back in 2005. On Apple, right? But the monetization mediums are still very unknown at this point. At least, so here's the thing. There are podcasts now getting created in a more traditional way of what you are doing now. But there is another genre that is getting coming out, which they call as podcasts, but they're largely audio stories. So here's the thing. About 2 years ago, I started a company with the well-known writer Hussein Zaidi. Golden Pen Productions, and that was supposed to be a production arm where we would build crime thriller. And we did 3 different podcast deals, which were essentially narrations of Hussein's own stories. Not necessarily the ones he's published in the books, but the stories that he had amalgamated over the years about various crimes that they've seen. So we did a deal with the radio channel where we supplied close to 55-minute stories to them. Right, audio. They called it as a radio podcast, correct? There was a deal we were running with Audible on 2 of Hussein's books, correct? Which would be converted into completely audio narration stories. Again, they were podcasts. They were not conversations. They were largely narrations. So if you sort of put all of them together and say, yes, podcast category mein ye bhi aa jata hai, all this comes into podcast category as well. So yes, there is a new category of audio content that is getting created. Which is largely an extension of what you see on entertainment. So audio stories or audio cinema is what was there about 10 years back. I don't see as often, but some of these interesting stories built into audio. On the licensing side, we've not seen too much licensing of podcast content because monetization of podcast content is yet not evolved to that great extent. There are not too many players who are able to monetize podcast content, so they're not buying podcast content, quite honestly. Or there is no cross-border, collaboration around it. Once, of course, that whole monetization medium gets evolved and things become a little clearer, you'll see a lot more activity around podcast across the world.
Do you think it's also because the publishing format of podcasts is so one click, right? Like this podcast currently goes out, published by IVM and goes out to every podcast publishing platform that IVM publishes it on to. So it's a little bit of a departure, right, from being a sort of single channel rights model into something that's a lot more distributed publishing. Do you think that's the right model? Do you think that's going to change?
I think that model will change. Of course, you've heard Joe Rogan going exclusive with Spotify now with a $100 million deal, right? So that sets the tone. I think that the model that you mentioned was there because there was no other model earlier, because no one was making money. So it was easier for all the creators to simply put it on all the platforms possible and get reach. So focus was reach. The focus was not really making money as much or getting reach so that you can charge money to brands, correct? Who are integrated into your podcast. But now going forward with what Spotify is doing, I think there are some very new models that will come out. And this deal with Joe Rogan is really the first of its kind deal. Who knows that we will have our own podcast host superstars, right? The way you have Instagram influencers, the way you have influencers, and for all some of those influencers will become, celebrated podcast hosts as well. Absolutely. So I'm bullish about the medium. I'm bullish about the overall audio as a medium that will evolve and that will grow. Personally, I'm trying to make investments in that area as well. Build certain verticals within my company and see if we can build it out. But the format and what will make money, what will not make money is yet to be determined.
Figured out.
Correct. So some folks are running podcasts because they want reach, they want brand, they want their own personal PR or their personal network to grow, and it's a great medium because it doesn't cost a lot to build a podcast.
Absolutely, it cost me nearly nothing to do it. And I have the support of IVM, so I love those guys.
So you're not really doing this for money, right? And there are quite a few folks who are out there who are not doing this for money. But the ones who are doing this for money will have to figure out the right format and how they do it. I see an uptick in educational podcasts, on the professional side. So I know a lot of folks who will, do a podcast with a startup founder, ask, the nitty-gritties of the journey, what helped them grow, the specific anecdotes that they have, package them together and, build a subscription business. Like this one, yes.
I mean, like I said, I have twin intentions behind this podcast. Number one is to put some thoughts together with smart people who are doing really unconventional stuff in entertainment, right? I think very little gets talked about the kind of things that make all of this glamour in this business happen, no matter where you look. And the second reason is, like I told you a little while earlier, it gives me a break during the work week. I tend to be a little bit of a workaholic in that sense, so I just throw myself in work. So it gives me time to pause, have a chat that is not related to work. So, like, I'm glad to hear that you're bullish on the podcast medium, and totally the Joe Rogan deal, the Gimlet deal, $300 million for Gimlet is also very, very healthy signs for the podcast industry. Let me ask you about a more traditional business model and your experience with it, right? I think we tend to discount TV these days more and more as OTT becomes the new shiny object, and everybody's releasing a new type of OTT. Jeffrey Katzenberg with QB, which is just mind-bogglingly weird. And then you have Netflix and all of that. But TV still remains, the medium of choice, whether it's financially, because the largest section of the AdX still goes to TV, whether it's culturally, right? I think वो टीवी पे आया है, or TV still remains the way to build overnight reach and recognition for anything. Where does TV go from here, right? How do they maintain the sort of cultural superiority that it's always had? And the way I want the things I want to talk about are, we're seeing the golden age of TV, prestige TV happen in the West, but we're not seeing that much of that kind of reaction from TV producers here. There's little or no innovation. It's still very much a numbers game. Subscription revenues on TV are still not as through the roof as people would like to be. So it's a complex place, right? Would you agree? It's a hard place to be right now, TV?
It is a hard place to be, definitely. But see, I look at it differently. For me, TV versus OTT are just delivery mediums, correct?
Right.
Ultimately, what you're doing is, a TV just delivers content to your television set via satellite or a cable, and OTT is just delivering it via internet connection, right? So they're just access mediums, quite honestly. The only reason we've bifurcated them so much is because of the kind of audiences that are there. So while OTT is more for, urban millennial audiences, TV goes more to massy audiences. But here's the thing. If tomorrow with Geo set-top boxes, correct, access to all content happens via internet, there is no TV. But the content will remain the same. So ultimately, it is not whether TV will remain or not. What one has to ask is, will that kind of content genre will continue or not? Or will audiences continue to patronize that kind of content or not? I don't think that behavior will change at all. Right? Whoever is watching Saas Bahu shows today, they will continue to watch Saas Bahu shows. You throw them on All Balaji, they'll watch it there. You throw them on ZEE5, they'll watch it there. Correct? You ask anyone at Hotstar or Sony Live or Jio, in fact, and ask them, Baba, what is contributing the maximum engagement or number of hours? They'll still catch up content. It is the same shows that they see on GC. Their rerun is garnering most number of views in the end. So the access medium will change. I think television as an access medium, as an infrastructure of the satellite and the cable and all that will go away in the next 10 years. Internet will become the primary mode of delivery, but the content genres will not change as much. There are, of course, cultural changes that happen as a population ages. So, what you and I are part of, or the kind of, age group that we are part of, as we age, our content viewing pattern won't change. So we'll still continue to watch what we are watching today. And the ones who are watching Saas Bahu will age a little bit more. So It will just be aging. And as the younger population becomes older, they become mainstream, the content becomes mainstream. What they watch, that becomes mainstream. So that's about it. Yes, in 20 years, will Saas Bahu be dominant? No.
Yeah, which is what I wanted to come to, because when I was growing up, a TV lineup would look like 7 to 8:30 comedy. Then there was what you would call family entertainment, and then 10 o'clock onwards it would go into horror, and then you would have a late night chat show sort of a lineup. Any entertainment channel, so to speak, would do this. And I'm talking about this across languages, right? Obviously, treatments were different, but Tamil and Telugu had their own sort of local community-based chat shows. Horror was there with Ahat and Sannata and those programs. 10 years on, most lineups reflect a lot more family programming blocks.
Correct.
What would you say would be the driving forces of these decisions from then on? So 10 years from now, how do you see this changing, this sort of programming block or programming lineup changing? And what would be the commercial implications of something like this? Say, for example, Z decides to bring horror back. Do you think that sort of genre split or that kind of innovation having a much more impact, or would you see better family oriented entertainment happen more prestige TV starting to be created?
See, that decision, there's a third party that actually commands that decision-making process more than most people know of, which is the advertisers and the agencies. So why you see so much more family content is because advertisers are demanding for it. More than the audience is the advertisers who are saying, look, we can spend more money or you can have more advertisers if you make very, very family-driven content. So see, a lot of the content we produce on TV, like I said, is not decided by what the audience wants, but also what the advertiser is willing to fund.
Right.
Depending on how that pattern changes over the next 10 years, correct, the content genres will change. Horror is a prime example, right? Horror as a genre was very successful on Indian TV back in late 90s with Ramses and, early 2000s. However, as time passed by, more and more brands didn't want to be associated with the emotion of fear or the emotion of horror, right? And that's where horror as a genre died completely. On the other hand, when you release It or one of those Hollywood horror movies, they break records here in India.
Absolutely. And we're seeing some very interesting horror get made, but Indian horror sort of has been sort of slightly left behind is what I feel. And again, you're right. You're absolutely right. The advertiser today in India subsidizes the consumer and the TV channel, right? At the end of it, our consumer monetization rates on TV are like water level low compared to even what we're willing to pay for OTT. It's a heavily regulated market in that sense. Let me ask you, how do channels, is it an evolved strategy for TV channels today to look at international markets? Are they, is there significant intelligence that has been built up within the ecosystem, or is that still evolving? What I'm trying to get at is, how do TV channels then decide which titles to create and export, or what is the maths then that goes into it?
Right. So here's the thing. When TV channels decide their programming or titles, they actually don't look at export at all.
Right.
Pretty much all the revenues or much bigger part of revenues come from the local broadcast that they have. So all the programming decisions are really taken from a local broadcast point of view. They don't build stories from an international point of view at all. None of that goes into consideration, quite honestly. Of course, once they make it, because they make in factory level, then it becomes our job, or people like us, my company's job, to sort of sniff through, find out, okay, this year Sony has produced 20 odd shows, 4 are worth licensing, correct? And you start running deals on those. Not everything is worth licensing in international countries, correct? Some of them are, of course, surprises that turn up. And, we've had a share of surprises, quite honestly. I mean, if we start with those stories, you will probably have another 1 hour episode after that.
We've got time.
So I don't think they take that into consideration. More importantly, they themselves don't know how big some of those shows are in those distant regions. So I'll come back and mention the example of Jamaica. So there's a star TV show called Is Pyar Ko Kya Naam Do. It's from 2012-13, correct? With Barun Sobti, the guy who's in Asur now, and Sanaya Irani. A normal, very lovey-dovey, romance conflict show. We sold it in Jamaica, the English dub version. They too became superstars there. I would get emails almost every third day from audiences there that we want to meet Barun. Oh, I've missed my last episode. Can you please play the, send me DVDs. And we were wondering, how are they coming to us? Why are they emailing us? So an interesting thing is when we sell those shows, we rename and give them in English titles. So this one, we gave it Strange Love, and the reference of that was only on our website. So everyone in Jamaica thought we are the producers, and we know Barun and Sanaya very, very closely. So they wanted videos, and I still have those emails, and it's crazy. And I don't think the actors.
What do you do when you get an email like this? Like, is there some kind of infrastructure that is there? Because there's clearly a market for these guys.
There is nothing.
So that's unmet demand, basically.
It's an unmet demand. I mean, there are opportunities to do events, local shows, a whole lot of things. And we did that in Indonesia like crazy back in 2017-18. Right. But there's similar stories across the world, in Vietnam, in Ghana, in many other countries where these stars are big. I mean, these actors are extremely big. They themselves don't know.
Wow.
I'll give a data point. Just pick up the Instagram handle of any of the television actors here and try to do the math and see how many are coming from Indonesia. You'll find that about 70% of Instagram following for most Indian TV actors is from Indonesia. But here's the thing. Channels or broadcasters are oblivious to the fact. They actually don't care.
As are brands, because I put together influencer campaigns where we're like, oh, this TV actor has 5 million followers on Instagram. And actually, I'm sure that's a big number that could be from Instagram, from Indonesia.
And here's the thing. We sold influencer marketing campaigns to brands in Indonesia in 3 years ago, sort of riding on this wave, right? So channels don't take export or international into consideration at all. They do monetize it. So pretty much most of the television channels here, the bigger ones, of course, have downlink in many other countries. So all throughout Africa, you can watch them on Star Times or Mnet. They have similar deals in MENA. They have similar deals in the US. They all are there on Dish TV, Dish Network there. Same in UK. So they all have their channel downlink. So if, NRI population, they want to subscribe, they can do that. And that international piece brings in substantial revenues for most of these folks. Licensing, unfortunately, it brings a lot of money, but from a percentage revenue-wise, it's still very, very small.
What would you say is like a thumb rule to go with, saying from a channel's overall net revenue, how much would come from
very, very little, very little. I mean, take Star, for example, there's about 12,000 crores of revenue every year. They generate not more than 70 to 80 crores a year from licensing, and that's also gone down now. Colors does a good job, again, a few crores, but none of them have crossed 100 crores except for Z in the past, and their revenues have also come down for other reasons though. But collectively, television export, all India put together is not more than 400 crores or 500 crores. That's max.
That's pretty small, given that we're a massive TV producer as well, right? I mean, we talked about this on the episode with Rahul and Chitra as well, where India has faced a lot of challenge in being able to export it. And you talked about it on the previous episode when you said that we are a very sort of price-sensitive market where it turns into a race to the bottom because of everyone undercutting on pricing. Let me ask you a couple of things, and I know you're the right guy to tell us about this because you are heavily invested in technology as well. Is there a sort of algorithm, a science, a marketplace? How is this market for buying and selling of content evolving? For my listeners, to give you a little sense of how I understand the market, and I've been a dabbler in licensing previously, I know that there are certain buying and selling events. There's MIPCOM, MIPTV, Singapore Media Week, Hong Kong Media Week, a fair few other that happen, which are very convention-led buying and selling models. So what I want to ask you, Vivek, is what is life at these events like, and what value do they add? And B, how is technology sort of creeping in? And is there an algorithm that is being created somewhere or a marketplace that is being created somewhere to make it easier to buy and sell?
So marketplaces have been around. In fact, when I started GoQuest, we launched IndianContentMarket.com.
Right.
That was my technology side to the business, right? And markets have come and gone, quite honestly. Online markets have come and gone, but the physical markets still remain. So primarily because the business model for online markets require fragmentation on both sides.
Right.
What happens is there are quite a few sellers, but there are still very few buyers. And most of the selling is also done by the top 10%. So top 10% sellers command almost 60-70% of the revenue pie, correct? So for an online marketplace to survive, the fragmentation that is needed on both sides is not really there. Secondly, the ticket sizes are very large. So, how do you transact when it's a $50,000 deal? How does a marketplace move money from its own banks, correct? From its own accounts?
Right.
Plus, it's not a standard template like a stock footage or anything. There are multiple sort of points of negotiations that go into any deal. And again, you can't really do that over marketplace. So online marketplaces have not been very successful. Also because they try to take a pie of the transaction more so than solve for the real problem, which is discovery. The same problem an audience has, which is discovering content when you're sitting on Netflix, the same problem a programmer has. What is out there that I can buy that will get me ratings, correct? And sniffing through that whole plethora of content and figuring out what is available is still a problem that needs to be solved. IMDb is not the solution here. So there is definitely a need for a discovery platform to come into play, not a transacting platform. The problem is most of them have focused on becoming part of the transaction because that's where you get valuation and that's where investors are interested in, so forth. But the value is in discovery here.
Would you say like a fee-based discovery curation platform is more possibility for success?
Correct. So, and of course, there's technology required, but something that helps, I'm the programmer of a TV channel. I need to find out what should I buy and what should I play and what is out there. Correct. And of course, once that is solved, it becomes easier. As far as the conventional markets are concerned, they also play a big role beneath. See, understand this business now is a business of paperwork. So, correct. I, as GoQuest, can go and say, hey, look, I represent all of Yashraj's catalog, which I don't, correct? I have no relation there. But I can go and talk about it to anyone in a deal. So, because the business doesn't have such operational heavy lifting, there are a lot of fly-by-night operators who come in and go. So, conventional sort of markets help you avoid that problem. So, distributors who have been regular are trusted more to do the right thing. Their rights are cleared, all the backend is clear. They understand how content needs to be delivered. And over and above, they also curate the right content. So if GoQuest, I as a distributor, I will not pick up any Tom, Dick and Harry show and start selling it. Correct? I will curate it to make it a best possible sale for my buyer. That's where those conventional markets become very important. Second thing is, it's also one of those businesses where people want to see who's selling. Having some sort of a face-to-face interaction and rapport helps speed that conversation and negotiation better. Helps build that trust better, correct? That's where those conventional sort of markets, which are more physical, traveling and meeting people, they become more and more.
It is a buying quality. Like you are buying quality at the end of it, right? Even though you might try and value it as quantity, you will end up buying quality. And it's important to know who's selling. That makes absolute sense. And if I look at it in a sort of spectrum way, then it is on the end where you are still buying and selling art, right? At the end of the day, you might be selling it in a different way to a slightly different market, but it still remains on that spectrum. Let me ask you this, right? While art valuation cannot be explained, content or entertainment valuation does have certain science.
Some benchmarks, yes.
It absolutely goes into it, right? Just in continuation from my previous question as well, then, is there an algorithm, a technology solution that has been thought of to take into account all the different quality, quantity parameters that need to go into it? I'll give you a brief example. For when we were selling TVF shows, one of the way we reinforce the superiority of TVF's storytelling, which is a purely quality metric, is by saying, my 30-minute episode has 14 scenes or 18 scenes, whereas a regular TV show might have 8 scenes or 7 scenes. Right? So you would always try and find ways of quantifying the quality aspects of it, right? So is there something that is in the works from a technology perspective that brings all of these aspects together in an algorithm? Is that something that's been tried?
Nothing out there.
Right.
Also, because what one wants to buy or how they want to buy is definitely is actually quite unknown at this point, or they keep changing. So it's a very interesting example you brought up, because that's how Indian or the Hindi language broadcasters, movie channels, they buy South Indian titles. There is actually a price basis the number of action scenes, minimum 4 action scenes, correct? Each action scene has to be at least 10 minutes long. At minimum.
And only then that's the pricing.
And that's the pricing. And if instead of 4, there are 3 action scenes, the pricing changes.
Fantastic. That's quality benchmarking. Right?
That's quality benchmarking. And similarly, if I'm selling a show in Eastern Europe, especially the Balkan region, they have a very simple criteria: tears. I need to see tears. If I can't see tears, this will not work for my audience, right? So you have to look for a show that has tremendous amount of melodrama. Even romance would work in those regions, correct? So the problem is the whole selection criteria is so qualitative. How do you build that into an algorithm? That becomes a challenge. Or someone needs to just sit and create a universe of, those meta tags or things that define this show. That, lots of crying, clothes with color, based in rural environments. So, you kind of make those descriptive tags to a show and then let anyone search it. But it's a heavy activity. It's a very manual activity where one has to go through a show and determine those descriptive features.
Absolutely. I think the only parallel examples of this that we see at scale are what Netflix has been able to do with their recommendation algorithm and what Amazon Prime has done. But again, they sit at the input points of a lot of data that helps really break down the quality of a viewership experience into sort of discrete data points that can be figured out. Let me ask you my last question about technology and entertainment. This is something that someone asked me at a convention. I was on a panel and it was one of the audience questions that came to me, and it really struck me at that time because I hadn't given it that much thought, is application of blockchain in rights management. Have you seen that pipe dream become real, or is it still blockchain in rights?
No, I mean, see, the thing is there are two different things, correct? Blockchain, because it was hot, it was just people were trying to force fit into things, and not just entertainment, across the industries, people were trying to force fit blockchain into things where it is not really needed, correct?
Right.
So what we do is licensing. In that, you don't really need a blockchain. What can be done with a blockchain can be done with a database. What do you do in a blockchain is things that are immutable, that cannot be changed, correct? That once a record is made, a record is made, like bank transactions or audit transactions or something like that, correct? And things that need to be, not controlled by one entity, right?
Yeah, public knowledge that is shared.
Public knowledge.
Everyone having equal rights and all of that.
Correct. And there are other sort of applications, but things that can be done with a database can be done with a database. So rights management doesn't really need blockchain, but there are some use cases around royalty management, correct?
Sure.
That are out there, which can be built on blockchain. When I say royalty management, think of it this way. Let's say you have licensed a certain lyric to some aggregator who's then selling it at multiple places. Correct. How does that royalty get booked? How does that get recorded? Because now it's significant fragmentation across the world, correct? And is there a standard way to report that royalty? Again, that's a very different use case. But I've not seen anything solid come out yet. It's an interesting use case to use it for royalty purposes, but not for the licensing business we do. Not for rights, the kind of rights management that we are involved in. It's an overkill.
Thank you for busting that myth. Because when I first heard of it, I was like, that makes sense. Theoretically, that makes sense, but I don't know if it's the right application of the technology. Let me flip this chat over to talk about you a little bit more in detail about your experiences. I mean, you're a 3X founder, co-founder. You're clearly someone who's several times over found things that you love to do, that you would love to
quite a bit actually.
And which is such a refreshing sort of contrast from find your passion people, right? And I mean, full respect to them, but it's great to see someone who's done it multiple times over. How's that experience been for you? And love to hear how it was the first time around compared to the second time and the third time. I think there's a lot of great things that my listeners could get out of your experiences.
So here's the thing, I've been doing money making since I was almost 17 or 18, correct? Right. From college time itself, doing small things to just make pocket money, to starting a computer hardware assembly business. Not really a business, but just things you do and make some money on the side with my best friend.
This was in Bombay.
This was back in Bombay. I'm born and brought up in Bombay itself. So I studied engineering at Shine Anchor College in Chembur, and while in college, this friend of mine and I, we used to do computer assembly. So we used to sell assembled computers to folks. We even started a website during the .com boom called engineeringblues.com, which was about everything engineering, your notes, your databases, everything. We in fact actually had an angel investor who didn't really put money, but he used to run one of those coding shops, and he just gave away a whole bunch of resources and coders to it and said, "Jo karna hai karo, inke saath banao apna."
Right.
So, the cycle essentially started back there. And like I said, I've done a lot of money making things. I used to sell GRE softwares also. After taking my GRE,
Right.
all the various softwares are downloaded, crunch them. I used to sell those CDs.
I'm assuming you're a computer engineer, IT computer.
I'm a computer engineer. So, doing some of these small things were sort of embedded very early on, correct? Then I went to the US, of course, working there, doing those 20 hours a week job, which was again programming job, but at the same time doing coding on the side, taking, small projects on the side and making money. So, doing such commercial activities was sort of embedded from very early on, given what I was doing. So starting anything new was never a point of anxiety. There was never a fear or a scare that, I'm starting something on my own. How will I do this? How will I make money? Because a certain DNA was already built up. But so I went to study computer science in the US. I actually wanted to become a software engineer. I was very, very good at coding back in the day. But a good friend of mine named Kumar Guru, he sort of changed the direction of my life. He forced me, or rather cajoled me into going to a business program at Dartmouth College in the US. And from there on, instead of going into software, I decided to jump into management consulting, very, very different fields. Karke dekhte hain kya hota. Let's just give it a shot. If not, I'm good at coding, I'll go back to coding. I'll find a job. So, there's never a problem finding a job. So that's where, the journey away from software engineering started. I used to still code for hobby. And do those things still while working for that company.
Do you still code?
I try to code for, small productivity things that I need to do. I used to code for a hobby. In fact, I created a movie aggregator site called moviekaka.com back in 2012, just because I wanted to learn Ruby on Rails. And that site at the time would aggregate all the OTT movies in one place and say, yeah, you want to watch this movie? It's available on Netflix. It's available on Spool, on, the platforms that existed at that time. But yeah, I left the site to be. There was no real sort of plan or agenda with it. It was just to learn a coding language. So I do that whenever I get a chance, but not really on a full-time basis, professional basis. So did that, came back to India, joined Tata Sky. That's where the whole entertainment thing began. I was setting up the whole pay-per-view business for Tata Sky. That's when I met movie producers, a lot of people related to the entertainment business. But again, very, very good learning. Some of the best times I've had there, In fact, one of the best jobs I've had at Tata Sky. This was 2007-8. But then I started out on my own because I'd seen a model around retail marketing. My expertise at that time was really retail marketing in FMCG stores, in large modern trade stores. So I started something called as Intellects Marketing. That was the first time I took the jump. Quite honestly, again, not much planned, correct? How things will go, where will it go? It's just that I thought it's a very good model. It's a chance in India to build a company around it. Let's just take the plunge. So I quit Tata Sky in 2008, end of 2008, and boom, financial crisis.
Right.
And so I've spent 2008, 2009 trying to build that company, even piloted my product in Hypercity here in Malad in Bombay. Amazing feedback from brands. Amazing feedback from brands. I still remember this category head, region head, who used to manage Hypercity as a region or part of her region. She was pissed, literally pissed when I told her I'm shutting down.
Oh, wow.
But so that first experience was very, very good. One of the things I learned to manage was the emotions. This whole entrepreneurship and starting on your own looks very glamorous today from outside, looks very interesting to a lot of people from outside. But the mental and the psychological ups and downs that you go through is just unmanageable for a lot of people. There'll be weeks where you will be euphoric, correct? Everything is going right. I'm going to become a billionaire. I'm going to become a millionaire. And, nothing can stop me. And suddenly next week, the emotion will be like, shit, nothing is going right for me. I don't think this is going anywhere. I think I'm a failure, correct? And
it's a tough gig.
And this, and this sort of, sine wave of euphoria and depression would go on, week to week basis. And managing that or learning to manage that was actually my biggest learning. Initial days was quite a bit of anxiety.
I think you put it very nicely. I mean, these days, especially if you just rely on the news, you'd think that running a startup is an Excel sheet job.
Correct.
Now, these are the metrics, and this is the number, and this is the input, and this is the valuation, and this is the output, and this is it. And only when you get in there do you realize it is all of that and a labor of love that saps you. I mean, I spent 4 years at a startup, and obviously at the best of times, but some very, very difficult times as well. But yeah, it's fantastic. Please tell us more.
So of course that was one of the best learning I've had. Again, learned that till a person says no, don't leave him. Correct. Keep calling. Be persistent. Correct. Don't be afraid to ask for help. That was again very important. And thirdly was talent management. That was the first time I really learned the importance of having the right talent. When you start for the first time, you think that you are the bond or, the king of everything, and, you can drive everything on your own. Very soon you realize, no, if you build a team, you need to manage the talent. You need to get the right talent because, simple differences in quality of talent changes the journey of your, the whole journey of your startup or the fate of your company. So I only had one employee at that time, correct? My co-founder had left. So it's just me and my employee, this one guy, an Argentinian who was doing all the coding part, and I was doing the selling part at that time. If I had known what I know now, I would have probably managed him better, correct? Though he left on some, on very, very good terms. But looking back, I'm thinking, if I get someone like that in my company, if all 50 are of that caliber, I can be a unicorn, so-called unicorn by revenue. Screw the valuation.
Right.
Correct?
Right.
That's when you understand that how much having good talent changes your fate. So that was a very interesting learning then. But again, bad timing, I couldn't raise money. There's a lot of sort of pressure at home to, start bringing in steady income and all that. Correct. I was unmarried, Marwadi family. So again, the whole perception ke Baba, problem ho jayega, and no girl will be ready to marry you or all that stuff, correct?
Cultural
factors and, constantly, but not as much, parents were very supportive, family was very supportive back in the day. Right. But again, the call had to be taken that how long do you continue? How much do you struggle? So, and that's when I shut that company. I decided to just reach out to people I knew. So I knew this gentleman, Sheetal Talwar, who was setting up a production company with Madhu Mantena, who had just produced Gajni. So Sheetal invited and he said, do you want to run international distribution? I had no understanding of what that is, but they thought I could do it. So I joined. It was supposed to be a stopgap. I never envisioned myself to be within the entertainment industry for too long. My heart always lied in tech.
Right.
But, once you get into the thick and thin of it, it's a very different experience. The kick is very different, when you're part of the entertainment industry. So 1 year led to 3 years. I pretty much learned all the ropes, everything as far as monetization of content is concerned. And then started out again in 2013. And starting then was fairly simpler, correct? I knew exactly what needs to be done as far as setting up the company was concerned. I knew the challenges. I knew what to do. So everything other than, collecting money or generating revenue, which was the most uncertain part, I practically knew how to manage everything else. So it was fairly easier at that time to start.
How many people did you start with
4.
When you started Go? 4, okay. And now you're 52, you said?
Yeah.
That's wonderful, Res. I mean, I think it's been about 6-7 years.
7 years now. 7.5 years now.
Yeah. And so let me ask you this: who do you benchmark against when you're growing, especially in a still nascent market in India? I wouldn't say it's a small market. I'm sure the market potential is quite big, but it's still nascent the way it's being developed. So who do you benchmark against? How do you benchmark your growth? How do you envision that happening for the next few years?
So we're not really benchmarking ourselves to anyone else at this point. What we've done right now is set sort of clear goals in terms of where we want to take this company as founders, in which direction. Whether there is an equivalent benchmark or not doesn't really matter. Also, because the whole system has changed. I can't look back at a company that started in 2011 and reached a certain stage and use them as a benchmark, because the business is absolutely different going forward. So what has happened before is not what I want to use as a benchmark to go forward, because that's when you miss out a lot of, the evolution that is happening. No one thought Geo would lead to certain outcomes. No one thought a Corona would lead to certain outcomes. So we are not doing that also because the evolution is very different. Also, when we started, we actually had no plan. The whole focus was just keep making money, keep running deals, keep making money. You asked me 4 years ago, did I have a business plan? No. Did I know whether you will do, X revenue or Y revenue? No. We just had the minimum that we had to make. That's what we went after. That this is the minimum profitability we need to collect every year, without which, that year will be a failure. And then just simply kept on doing it year on a year. We've just actually put a plan together now. So now building the direction to say, how do we build a company that is at minimum $100 million, revenue company? Again, in entertainment business, I don't think valuation is the right way to look at it, because unlike tech, valuations are very different out here, right? It's not as if you get 10x or 20x of your revenue as valuations.
The fan is more 3x, 5x.
3x, 5x. So, and the core has always been, we've been bootstrapped, and, we've seen the how do I say, quote unquote, the benefits of being bootstrapped. Of course, there are disadvantages as well. Not that investors just come in with money, they come in with a lot of contacts, understanding, knowledge, best practices as well. And that helps a lot. But at least in our case, we were able to do a lot of experiments because we were bootstrapped. I didn't have to ask anyone, right?
Right.
And there are pros and cons to that. And I've done some very, very bad decisions as well. If you just aggregate all the bad decisions that we've done in the last 4 years, I think most other entrepreneurs would just slap me and say, how can you do this? Right? Most people with sane mind would say, how can you be such a big idiot? But that's the thing, correct? When you're bootstrapped and you're making money, correct? You have, I wouldn't say the arrogance, but have the entitlement to actually be able to experiment a little bit more and spend a little bit more money, as long as you know that you can make that money back in some form or the other. So we only put a plan together now, and the goal is now to build a $100 million revenue company. That's what we are gunning for. Still figuring out as to what piece we invest a lot, because licensing business won't get us there. It's a great inroad. It's a great way to build a solid cash flow business. I mean, our profitability is better than most entertainment companies out there. We're just very, very below the radar, and we don't do fancy spends and PR. So very, very few know us, but the ones who know us, they know the level of business we do out there. But looking at the production business, looking at the platform business as well, we built up a business plan to start an OTT platform of our own. But again, not to the scale of Netflix and Amazon Prime or whatever you have there, a more mid-level OTT platform. So what an example could be what a B4U is to a Star Plus, correct? Sort of sit in that mid-level space, a niche space. So anything that gets you to that 500 crore yearly income, not really chasing 5,000 crore in the first step and then building it from there. So we've actually got 4 different plans. We just don't know what to take forward. I mean, we know what to take forward. We're just debating quite a bit between ourselves so that if we do something, we double down on that one thing and don't regret it later.
And I'm sure that path will reveal itself to you. Sounds like you have a very ambitious plan going, and all the best with that, Vivek. With that, I think I've come to my last question for you, and I'm quite excited to ask you this question because of the sheer range of content I'm sure you've seen, consumed, and dealt with. At the end of every episode, I ask my guests to share a recommendation for my audience, an entertainment recommendation. Could be a book, a movie, song. These days, it could be a game, a meme, could be whatever. So, yeah, a couple of recommendations from you.
Difficult question, because it always blanks me out. There's so much out there. I'm a little blanked out right now. I can't think of anything right away at the top of my head, quite honestly, which is a shame, actually.
You could tell us about the stuff that's done well in strange countries also. We could check that out.
Balika Vadhu. I'm sure your audience would like
it. Please watch Balika Vadhu from a critical eye.
Very critical, very critical. I'll say, if you can find out, there's a Serbian show called Besa, Besa. It's something that sort of, first of its kind of production quality that Serbia has produced. The storyline is very interesting. Usual crime family. check it out. That's something that we saw very, very recently, and we were trying to see if we can get the distribution rights of that. So that looks like a very, very interesting show that actually we've seen outside India.
Besa.
Besa. There's another one called The Cleaning Lady, which is out of Argentina. I'm not sure if the English subtitle version will be available to watch. No, I don't think so that will be available. But again, a very, very interesting show built around this lady who's a cleaner. She's a janitor. And then she becomes the top cleaner for mafias after they murder people. So cleaning up the blood and everything and her involvement. So very edgy and gritty.
Sounds like a Breaking Bad.
Yeah. It's actually on similar lines. It's actually
that's The Cleaning Lady.
The Cleaning Lady. Yeah, we've purchased rights for India. We'll soon be putting that into development for remake it in India. But one of those interesting things that I found out there, and something that we personally like, we picked that up quite a bit for our licensing business as well. So those are there. Yeah, I'm actually now pretty blanked out.
Those are great recommendations. I think always great to hear people talk about new shows that have not been discovered elsewhere. Vivek Lath, with that, we come to the end of an epic conversation. I think there's a lot to learn, a lot to unpack from what we talked about today. Thank you so much for making the time. It was really wonderful talking to you.
Thank you for inviting me.
Always a pleasure. With that, guys, thank you for staying tuned to the 2 episode special we had with Vivek Lath from GoQuest Media Ventures. With that, this is Vineet Kanabar saying goodbye.
I hope you enjoyed that show. I'd like to thank our sponsors this week, Paytm Money and Intel. So, been a really exciting week on the network this week. We've had some really cool stuff. My old friend Vivek Lath was on Storytellers and Storysellers. Definitely do check that out. On Cyrus Said, we had Ashwin Sanghi on Thursday's episode, and Cyrus and myself did a cock and bull, just the two of us. That was fun as well on Monday. Do check that out. Masaba was on Advertising is Dead, which was another really, really strong episode from Varun. And on the sports front, both Edges and Sledges, Football Shitball had some really fun episodes. That's the Football Twaddle. Do check those out as well. And if you haven't been paying attention and you haven't been listening to Smile India in these times, I don't know why you aren't. It's the most uplifting show that you could listen to. It's a short, bite-sized piece of really positive things that happen in India. Do definitely check that out. And with that, we hope to see you again next week.
Sachin Tendulkar, Virat Kohli, Don Bradman, and now Cyrus Brocha. Okay, probably not in the right company. I mean, Don Bradman is Australian. But it's called Cyrus Says, a wonderful show about everything. Find the show on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to podcasts.